New season of History Review. I'm your host, Captain Rutlidge, and these are my humble lodgings. Throughout history, there have been several great military leaders, from Alexander to Napoleon, and Wellington to T.E. Lawrence. However, every so often there have been leaders that really did not live up to the standards of the former mentioned, or even failing to meet at eye level to those standards. So today, we will take a look at a few of the weakest military leaders in history. Before we begin, I would like to make a few things clear. Firstly, not every terrible leader will be on this list. And secondly, there may be a few surprises in store. Now then, let us begin with one of the earliest of the weakest military leaders in history, Darius III of Persia. As king of Persia, provinces of Darius III's empire were ruled by unreliable governors, and subjects were highly rebellious. When Alexander began his campaign against Persia, Persian army suffered several great defeats despite an advantage in number of men. In the end, the governor Bessus had his men stab Darius to death and leave the king in a wagon to die. Moving from the ancient world to the modern, the next weak leader is from the 7 Years' War, from 1756 until 1763. Speaking of which, let's have a costume change. Oh, that's nice. Anyways, this young man from Virginia would later go on to lead his country to independence. But first, he was just an ineffectual lieutenant colonel of the Virginia militia, a man by the name of George Washington. Washington began his career as an ambassador to the French settlers and Native Americans living in the northwest Pennsylvania. During an ambush on a French scouting party, the leader of the party was killed, sparking the worldwide 7 Years' War. Washington then lost Fort Necessity to the French, and took part in a failed expedition under General Edward Braddock. Afterwards, Washington commanded the Virginia Regiment and had to stop an incident of friendly fire between the men of his militia during the capture of Fort Duquesne. In the end, through his failures, Washington learned more and more about soldiering, eventually aspiring to the rank of Commander-in-Chief of the Continental Army during the American Revolution. Keeping in the 18th century, this next leader also suffered several defeats in his career. While many would say that either Horatio Gates or Benedict Arnold were the worst generals of the American Revolution, I beg to differ. The true recipient of that prize would be General Charles Lee. Charles Lee was born in England and served as an officer in the regular army during the 7 Years' War. He then served as an aide-de-camp to the Polish king during the Russo-Turkish War. Lee moved to the colonies in 1773 and joined the American cause with hopes of becoming Commander-in-Chief, but lost the post to George Washington. Although he repulsed a British attack on Charleston, he was captured by the British in 1776 after taking up quarters in a tavern 3 miles from his men, and disobeyed orders from General Washington, causing a near defeat at Monmouth, only remedied just in time by the Marquis de Lafayette. Lee was arrested, court-martialed, and relieved of command, living the rest of his life on his estate in Virginia. Moving forwards, we come to the War of 1812 between the newly formed United States and Great Britain. While many historians would defend this next leader as having a bad day, I think that he should have known better. May I present Brigadier General William Hull. Hull fought in the American Revolution and was made governor of the Michigan Territory in 1805. When war was declared on Britain, Hull was unaware and lost some vital military papers on a schooner captured by the British forces. Isaac Brock, in command of the British and Native American forces, made it seem as if he had a larger force than Hull, causing Hull and his 2,000 men to surrender Fort Detroit to Brock and the 1,300 British and Allied forces. Hull was court-martialed and nearly sentenced to execution, but given a reprieve from President James Madison. Hull spent the rest of the war in Newton, Massachusetts, and died in 1825. The Crimean War during the 1850s marked a new frontier in the history of the British Army, namely, working in part to end the monetary promotional system for officers. True, this system did produce some capable commanders like Wellington and General Brock. These next three stooges show the problems of the system. Please welcome the Earls of Cardigan, Lucan, and Raglan. Raglan, Lucan, and Cardigan were all aristocrats who bought their way into the British Army. Raglan was in command of all British forces, Lucan in command of all cavalry forces, and Cardigan in command of the Light Brigade. Lucan and Cardigan, both brothers-in-law, despised each other, and Raglan's treatment of the British forces was deplorable and inhuman. During the Battle of Balaclava, orders sent by Raglan were misinterpreted by Lucan, causing the disastrous charge of the Light Brigade, causing the loss of 278 men. The three men made scapegoats of each other, giving enough proof that the purchase system was not an ideal method for selecting officers. During the first half of the American Civil War, the United States Army had a string of unsuccessful generals, until Ulysses S. Grant was chosen as General of the Potomac. By far the worst of these early generals was Major General George B. McClellan. McClellan did a fantastic job at turning the Union Army into a well-oiled fighting machine, but he did not know how to use it. His procrastination in battle led to the losses at South Mountain and Sharpsburg and large numbers of casualties at Antietam. Lincoln, altogether fed up and untrustworthy of McClellan, removed him from command and replaced him with Major General Ambrose Burnside. After his career as a soldier, he unsuccessfully ran for president, worked as a city planner for New York, and wrote books defending his career in the Union Army. McClellan wasn't the only bad apple of the Union Army. Another leader's ineffectiveness eventually cost him his life at the Battle of the Little Bighorn in June of 1876. His name, Major General George Armstrong Custer. Custer graduated at the bottom of his class at West Point Military Academy and was commissioned into the 2nd U.S. Cavalry at the start of the Civil War. Although he led successful cavalry charges during the war, Custer met his Waterloo during the Plains Indian Wars after the Civil War. He frequently disobeyed orders and knew little of Native American tactics and bravery. During the Battle of the Little Bighorn, Custer attacked a 2,000-strong Native American force with his force of only 647 men. In the end, Custer paid for his ineptitude with his life, and the lives of half his men. A phrase commonly used to describe the British Army during World War I was lions led by donkeys. The French Army, though, had its share of ineffective commanders too. While the French had enough sense to replace General Division Robert Nivelle, Field Marshal Douglas Haig was kept on as commander of the British forces through the rest of the war. Nivelle and Haig had a lifetime of experience in their respective armies, but their ideas of war were extremely old-fashioned. Nivelle's ineptitude in battle cost over 150,000 French lives, but he was soon made commander-in-chief of the French forces. His later offensive plans cost so many lives that over half of the French army mutinied. In the end, Nivelle was replaced by Philippe Pétain and was sent to North Africa for the rest of the war. Haig was just as worse as Nivelle. Over 60,000 of his troops were killed on July 1, 1916, the greatest loss of British lives on a single day in all of history. Thanks to Haig, or rather the government that failed to remove him, 800,000 British and Commonwealth soldiers died by the war's end, thanks to his indifference to human life and unwillingness to adapt to modern warfare. The ineffectiveness of the British commanders even stayed on until the Second World War. Among the most ineffective of the British World War II commanders was the commander in the Pacific arena, Lieutenant General Arthur Percival. Before his command in World War II, Percival was in charge of putting a stop to Irish rebellions in Northern Ireland. In 1941, he was sent to Singapore to command the British forces in the Pacific. On February 15, 1942, after 3 months of fighting the Battle of Singapore, Percival surrendered the island of Malaya to Japan, going against the orders given by Winston Churchill to hold out. 138,708 Allied personnel surrendered or were killed by less than 30,000 Japanese. Percival spent the rest of the war in captivity and was ridiculed by the public upon his return home for his surrender, until his death in 1966.
You stupid bum.
Our final, ineffective military leader was in charge during the infamous Vietnam War. Let us round out our list with General William Westmoreland. Westmoreland's command during the first years in Vietnam went quite smoothly. In 1968, though, he began the infamous Tet Offensive that cost the lives of several thousand soldiers, along with over 30,000 civilian casualties. In the end, the offensive did little to remedy the situation, as the North Vietnamese and Viet Cong fought through guerrilla warfare. And it gave the Vietnam War a bad name in the books of American history. Even with the infamous leaders mentioned here, there were still several great leaders and militaries in history. For more information on the leaders mentioned on today's show, visit your local library or bookstore. For History in Review, I'm Captain Rutlidge. Good day.
You stupid bum.